managing migration along the central Mediterranean route.
Frau Kommissarin, Sie haben das Wort.
You have the floor, Commissioner.
Friends, the upcoming summit, informal summit we'll have in Malta starting Friday, will be for us, I believe, an opportunity to show that an efficient and at the same time human management of migration is possible and is a must if we work together, both as Europeans in solidarity and in partnership with our friends, countries of origin and of transit. We can and we must repeat once again, as we did here just 1 hour ago, that refugees must be welcome. This is a strong position that the European Union has and will continue to have. And at the same time, without any contradiction, on the contrary, with some complementarity, we can and must say that the pain and the deaths caused by smugglers have to be stopped. I've seen with my own eyes people that have managed to survive, stories that nobody should not only live but also even listen to. And I think that it is first and foremost a humanitarian duty, not only to save lives but also to protect the lives of the people that are migrating. As you know very well, in the last 2 years we've been working literally day and night to reduce human suffering first and foremost, to reduce the loss of lives on the different routes leading to Europe, in the Mediterranean Sea for sure, but also in the places where the loss of lives and the violation of human rights are less evident to the cameras of our TV stations, in particular in the desert. In the central Mediterranean, our Operation Sophia alone saved last year more than 32,000 people. And each and every of them, for me, it's a precious result of a work that finally we're doing as European Union. We apprehended also more than 100 smugglers that now are in the hands of justice. Our migration compacts with 5 African countries have started to substantially reduce the irregular flows. For instance, the number of people crossing irregularly from Niger into Libya has decreased to its lowest level in years. We see so that our action is delivering in real terms. It's starting to deliver in real terms, with always this first concern, which is human lives, saving them and protecting them. The report adopted yesterday by AFET and DEVE on the role of our external action on addressing refugees and migrants' movements encourages me to keep on this path of closer cooperation with third countries, including through regular channels for entering into the European Union. And here, on this specific point, I would ask your support, because among the commitments the European Union took with our partners at the Valletta Summit last year was also that of working more on the regular channels for migration. The more we work to prevent irregular flows, the more we have to offer regular channels. And we know very well this is a difficult debate in each and every of the member states, and also in this European Parliament. It is not by chance that back in December the Commission increased the resources for different mobility opportunities. And this is just the beginning. Still, last year we faced more than 4,500 deaths at sea in the central Mediterranean. And believe me, I wish we could name each and every one of them, because as long as we refer to numbers, it's much easier to forget them or to consider this as a phenomenon, while each and every of these people have a history, a story, a name, and a future. Should have. Yet, at times, we don't even have their names. This is why we need to do more. We all need to do more. In the European Union, in the spirit of solidarity among Europeans, and also with our partners that also have to take some of the ownership of the management of this problem. When we see people dying in the desert or close to the Libyan coasts, we have to discuss and to help our partners do their part to save lives and to make sure that the protection of human beings and their human rights is fully taken on board. I'll come to that in a minute. We need to do more, first to end the suffering, and to better manage human mobility. Last week I presented a package of additional measures worth €200 million that will feed into the discussion at the Malta summit the day after tomorrow. Of course, migration has always existed. I've been even accused many times for the fact that I'm constantly pointing to the fact that, first, migration used to be, since a couple of decades ago, from Europe to the rest of the world. Second, that if we had to live without migrants in all our societies and all our economies, we would suffer a lot of negative consequences. Imagine the cost of non-migration for our European economies, and you would realize that indeed we're not talking about a bad phenomenon, we're talking about a phenomenon that needs to be managed. First of all, as I said, to protect human beings. And we all know that there is no easy way to stop the suffering and manage better the phenomenon. We know very well that the real solution implies, first of all, the economic development of Africa, and also the democratic development of Africa. Here, our daily work is going on with the compacts with the 5 priority countries, with the external investment plan, with the trust fund, and with the overall work we're doing in partnership, in particular with Africa, also working, and I know Commissioner Mimica will be joining us for the following debate, also in the framework of our cooperation and partnership with the African Union and the different countries in Africa, but also with the civil society and the people in Africa. Because we know well that the key to development is not only economy, it's also society, and a civil space for Africans to find their place and their way. But apart from that, we have also now to focus on what kind of quantitative and qualitative leap in our common joint work for immediate steps we can take together and with our partners. So I will name 3 proposals that will be on the table of the Malta summit on Friday, and that I believe can be, first of all, fully in line with the approach of partnership we have taken on the Central Mediterranean route and the African partnership from the beginning, last year, and be a clear change, clear step forward in having a more effective result. First, we want to increase the training of the Libyan Coast Guard. I am sure many of you remember a meeting we had here in this building a few months ago, several months ago, with the cast and the director of Fuoco a Mare, the documentary film that now is nominated for an Academy Award. And they told us one simple thing among many others. Do something for the Libyan territorial waters, they told us. Because before we were seeing people dying close to Lampedusa, in international waters. Now we're seeing people dying in the Libyan territorial waters. And we cannot act inside the Libyan territorial waters. This is a Libyan responsibility. But we can help. We can train and support the Libyan authorities in this work. This will be one of the things I will discuss tomorrow with Prime Minister Sarraj, not the only one. I'll come to that in a minute. Operation Sophia launched just a few days ago the 2nd package of training for a carefully vetted group of officials from the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy. And we now propose to increase the training even more substantially, including, and this is a very important point for me, including on human rights and women's rights and the respect of international standards and obligations. Second, we propose to step up our efforts on the southern borders of Libya, before the flows go inside a country that is by definition a difficult country to operate in. We have already started to facilitate a common approach between Libya, Chad and Niger in particular. Managing their common border is an interest they share, also for security reasons, because we see, as Europeans, our main focus is always, and here I see a lot of attention in that, maybe not in this semi-cycle, but for sure in our public opinions, on the migration flows that go through Libya towards Europe. But there's also a flow of a different kind that goes from Libya to the south, to the Sahel, and possibly connecting with the Lake Chad region, and possibly with Boko Haram. So there's a security challenge there also to control the border south of Libya in a more effective way. So managing this common border is their common interest as neighbors, but it's also our interest as Europeans. We are acting in the region with 3 missions and operations. We are already training local security forces, including on the respect of human rights. I stress this because for me, this is a key component of all the training we do to local forces. And these are powerful tools. We can make them even more powerful, improving cooperation among all actors in the region and taking a regional approach, including working with the African Union and its newly elected leadership, as we have the new African Union Commission President being the Foreign Minister, having been the Foreign Minister of Chad just since a few days ago. Third, we will increase our support, or at least this is my proposal, to the International Organization for Migration and the UNHCR. For me this is key, because you can act north at sea, you can act south in the Sahel, but the presence you have already now in Libya is there and will not disappear by itself. And we all know very well the human rights angle of this is extremely serious. So we have to find a way of addressing the dramatic situation of stranded migrants inside Libya in a very challenging security situation. I've met in recent weeks both Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and the General Director of the IOM, William Swing. Together we discussed ways in which the European Union can increase its support to the IOM and the UNHCR in order for them to work more and better inside Libya, and namely in the places where migrants are. Cooperation with these 2 organizations, for me, is the best possible way to guarantee the protection of human rights for migrants inside the country. A first project for €20 million was adopted in December under the Trust Fund for Africa. It will allow IOM to offer alternatives to a first group of 5,000 stranded migrants and take action to improve the dramatic condition in the detention centres. I believe that this will be really an element, a key element of our policy where we will need to work in team. UNHCR, IOM and the European Union, together with the Libyan authorities, trying to create the conditions for this to work. All these actions are designed having in mind the bigger picture. It's not the issue of today's debate, but I think it is a must to keep clearly in mind that the key element of our work is supporting peace and reconciliation in Libya. Again, as I said, this is not the issue for this debate, but this is my main work. And our work with Libya goes far beyond the issue of managing migration. I know this is the top priority for political parties, governments and public opinions in Europe, but believe me when I tell you, the main point for us is working on finding a political solution for the crisis in Libya. And this is what I have discussed with Martin Kobler, the UN Special Envoy, just a few days ago here in Brussels. And again, this will be the main point we'll discuss tomorrow with Prime Minister Sarraj here in Brussels. Again, and by the way, this is also what we will be discussing with the foreign ministers at the Foreign Affairs Council on Monday. But while we keep working to reach a political solution for Libya, there is much we can do in the meantime. Working with the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy, working with the mayors and the local authorities, working with Libya's neighbours, not only east and west, but also south, as a Libyan neighbour ourselves, because the European Union is a neighbour to Libya. And with respect, trying to help and trying to focus on, as I said, a political solution that can bring the country to a stable democracy and uniting the country more than it is now. We will continue to work in partnership along the lines we defined together in Valletta last year, in partnership with our friends, not only authorities but also civil society organizations, and in partnership with the international organizations and the UN system with which we are in this. In a week's time, we will have in Malta the first stock-taking exercise of the Valletta Summit action plan. Next week I will have the pleasure of opening it with the Maltese Foreign Minister to see with our African partners, but also with the partners of the northern part of Africa, where we are on the implementation of the action plan and what is the way forward in a sense of partnership. We have finally, as Europeans, I believe, started to do our part. We start to see some results. I mentioned the tens of thousands of lives saved, finally, but still, even if there was one person only dying at sea or in the desert, we see it or we don't see it. This is a responsibility and a problem that we are ready to try to solve. But again, it is not only a European responsibility, it's also a responsibility we have to share with our African partners and, in this particular case, also with our Libyan partners. Now, I hope, I believe, heads of state and government in Malta on Friday will commit even more strongly to save lives, both at sea and in the desert, to fight the smugglers and to protect the dignity of all human beings. And this also means being true to our values, which link us to the previous debate we had in this room. I thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Mr. Winberg, I failed to see, and I'd already given the floor to the Commissioner. You had asked to take the floor.
President, before we start the debate on this agenda item, I would make the following point. This agenda item was added after Beatrice von Storch tabled a major interpellation on managing the migration in the Mediterranean on behalf of...
Frau Kollegin,
Madam,
the order. Then tell me on which article you apply.
I don't have the article, but this was something we tabled.
Ja, Frau Kollegin, da haben...
Colleague, there's all sorts of ways you can make this public, but points of order have to be referred to a rule in the rules of procedure. If everybody gets to take the floor when something new appears on the agenda, then I don't know where we're going. The next speaker is Mrs. Gabriel, 2 minutes.
Madame la Haute Représentante, tout d'abord, merci.
First of all, thank you very much. It is very much in our interest as the European Union to not lose sight of what's happening on the Mediterranean in 2017, because the safety situation in the Mediterranean is going to ensure our security. This calls for coordinated action and mobilization through a whole series of tools. I would like to draw attention to a number of points. First of all, you said it is urgent to continue to save lives. By all means. Given the impossibility of going into Libyan waters, we have to lend our support to the coast guards in these countries, and we need to release funds for this project. But that's not the only thing that needs to be done. We also need to do serious thinking about how we can counter the behavior of the human traffickers in the territorial waters and international waters. What role can and should Frontex play? And of course, there are plans for spring operations, but we would like to have a clear timetable so that we can see results. Another urgent point, to stabilize the situation in Libya and to ensure that we have decent treatment for the migrants there. We must support the efforts of these countries and not lose sight of the fragility of the situation. We need to pay particular attention to the southern borders of the country. And the question I would raise is to what extent have some minorities, such as the Tubus, been included in the border management plans? Third point, it is true that the Libyan coast is the starting point for 90% of the migrants aiming to come to Europe, but that is not where they are from. Therefore, we must continue to work hand in hand with the countries of origin. Niger is a good case in point. 70 people in May, 1,500 in November. And what about the others? We need in the European Union to continue with our efforts to open up the legal pathways towards immigration. And final question, let's not forget countries such as Tunisia and Egypt. What role do you see for Egypt in migration management? The country is making efforts and it's important for us to support them.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Gabriel.
Thank you, Ms. Gabriel. Ms. Valenciano, next for 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Truth to tell, when we hear Mrs. Mogherini speak, one feels the immediate compulsion to congratulate her and thank her for the work she's doing. I think we're all aware of the hard work you're putting in. Undeniably, the EU's foreign policy hadn't played a major role in managing migratory flows. The approach was something that was left in the hands of Home Affairs ministers, but in recent years the EU Commission has worked very hard on this. We've got the Valletta Summit, the Migration Compacts, the high-level dialogues, and agreements and non-agreements signed with a number of countries such as Turkey and Afghanistan. And actually something rather unheard of has happened, and that is that our foreign policy has been activated precisely to achieve the objectives that we've heard outlined by Ms. Mogherini for the Central Mediterranean route. But I think this brings us to the question, is this effort enough? Is it heading in the right direction enough? Yes, there are some results. They're not as much as we'd like. But what I'm most concerned about is if for the longer to medium term, this is the right direction to head in. Are we genuinely managing to get respect for things like human dignity, human rights for people who migrate? Can the Commission's efforts and the efforts of this House, together with those of other institutions, obtain results in a way that is better than urgent action by Council? I mean, have we managed to reduce numbers of people coming in? Which tendency will win the day? Because how we answer this question will determine the future and will also determine the prestige of the European Union. The Central Mediterranean route today is the most deadly. In just a month, more than 200 people have perished. And stabilizing Libya has to be central to this, but it's of course not the only thing we need to achieve. We need to continue appealing to member states to defend dignity. The speaker's cut off. The President. Thank you very much, Mrs. Valenciano. Now for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Vistisen.
On the subject of the EU's response to the migration crisis, we can say that there have been some disproportionate efforts. Between 2015 and 2016, about 1 million people migrated towards Europe, and until now, the initiatives have only been trying to keep the migrants far away, and they're now on more treacherous routes compared to before, giving them incentives to come from the near regions towards Europe. Broadly speaking, the only humane and the only realistic and the only real solution for them would be dealing with the challenge of migration and to find a variation of the Australian model where we take the bread out of the mouths of the human traffickers and encourage people, tell them they cannot come and help the refugees where they are, where most of them and the most vulnerable are, in the nearby regions, giving them emergency help and safe areas instead of trying to stop the world's poor coming to Europe so long as it economically is possible to pay these human traffickers, the human smugglers, which is the reason why there's a good chance, at least in the medium term, to make a difference if we just try to block the way towards Europe. Our effort in European Parliament, we have to avoid that we're going to end up seeing them taking more and more dangerous routes as we try to stop them. More suffering for the people we're talking about, but also for the European situations that cannot cope with the situation.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you, Mr. Vistisen. The next speaker is Ms. Wikström, 1.5 minutes.
Vielen Dank. Madam Commissioner, thanks for your engagement, thanks for your commitment and your good intentions. It goes without saying that the European Union should always contribute to stability, growth and protection of human rights and democracy in our neighbouring countries. But we should and must never, ever outsource our own responsibilities and obligations on migration policies and people in need, or externalize our borders. In days where we on a daily basis today witness what the ugly face of populism in power really means. All decent and progressive forces on this continent need to unite. We need to put our differences aside and take the bold steps needed to preserve the values that created the foundations of this very union on the ruins of the Second World War. Openness, respect, a rejection of nationalism, egoism, and instead the promotion of human decency is what we now must engage in. Europe flourishes when we work together, when we act on the basis of visions and hope rather than on our fears and prejudices. I hope that this is the spirit in which you will work in Valletta this weekend, and I wish you a lot of success, and I wish that we bring back the need for now shared values and shared responsibilities for the people in need. Please, Madam Commissioner, bring that.
Thank you, Madam Wikström. The next speaker, Ms. Spinelli, 1.5 minutes.
Grazie, Commissario.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, the agreement with Turkey is not to be criticised, and Libya, the situation there is even more alarming. There is protest from European leaders against Trump, and yet at the same time they are putting in place illegal constructs which are debatable. And the UNHCR has been asking for a clear situation without any pushback or repatriations to Libya. When it comes to search and rescue, the fugitives are running real risks, torture in detention camps, violence against women, executions. We know from the UN that the dangers are not the smugglers, they're the traffickers, the uncontrolled militias, and the public officials of a deliquescent state. And we must not, Valletta will be an opportunity to guard against dangerous agreements, particularly Italy, because of the historical colonial past of our country. To the Commission, can I say, let's get away from double talk. You cannot say that the Turkey agreement cannot be replicated and then say that the main concern is to save lives, and then to talk about training coast guards and security forces who are Libyan, and then saying that they've got to coordinate with our frontier guards as well.
Thank you, Ms. Spinelli. Now for 1.5 minutes, Ms. Sargentini.
Thank you, Chairman. Earlier today, President, there was a discussion on the Muslim travel ban of President Trump, and you, Commissioner Mogherini, said that the European Union should not turn people away if people are entitled to protection. You also stated that the travel ban is only a temporary and illusory solution. I couldn't agree more, but this cannot square with your proposal to enter into agreements with Libya, where refugees are being held up at the coast and paying very handsomely for that. They cannot come because there's a hole in the border. Refugees are coming to Europe because they're fleeing war or poverty or hunger. Development money can be thrown away by trying to plug the gaps in the wall instead of creating real opportunities for young people in Africa. Is that not what you warned us against when it came to this temporary and illusory solution? If we give Libya a free hand to hold up the refugees and to lock them up, we're doing exactly what we're accusing Trump of doing. We're turning away from the people who need protection. And you will have read in Die Welt am Sonntag, the German ambassador in Niger had said the detention camps in Libya are concentration camps as existed in Nazi Germany. Camps where people are executed if there's a lack of room, and if we negate that, we don't need Trump when it comes to moral failure.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sargentini. Now, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maltese Prime Minister, Mr. Muscat, has predicted that the number of people crossing to Europe will reach record levels. Most of these people will come from Libya into Italy via people traffickers, as we know. The best way to stop these huge numbers of people illegally coming into Europe and to stop the large numbers of tragic deaths in the Mediterranean is surely to turn the boats back and process the migrants offshore. This is what Australia did, and it worked. And that is why 6 European countries now have been in private talks with Australia, asking them which way to work things out, because they know that the EU way is failing. People traffickers are criminals. Only today we have been warned by the Italian officials that jihadists are actually plugging the gaps in funding for their actual campaign by smuggling people into Europe because their oil money is running out. The EU and many people in this chamber need to realise that their naive, soft-hearted approach to migration has not only failed, but it has actually cost lives, funded terrorism and crime.
Vielen Dank, Frau Colleen Collins. Es spricht nun für 1,5.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Now, Mr. Borghezio, 1.5 minutes.
L'Alto Commissario non eletto.
The High Commissioner did not read what the Italians said, and the populists elected by the citizens. What we're seeing happening in Libya and the proposal to extend our operations to the Libyan waters, but what you don't say in Europe, where do you want this to lead with these boats, with the clandestine migrants? That is the point. I think that we've heard these very blanket statements from the High Commissioner, but they don't clarify the situation. In the Euroformed, we're told that about 1/3 of the total are colleagues that have been victims of traffickers, and maybe this is the reason why the government forces should cooperate, given the request of many European countries, particularly the request to send them back. It's a very blanket statement. In the report, we're talking about a protection line, but it doesn't say by whom or by what. And I think that through diplomatic channels, there is a method, and it's true that we have done things that we save lives, which the Commissioner always refers to, but it's been also a magnet attracting the migrants, and that is the failure behind this operation. It is a source of new tragedies, and it'll be a never-ending story. If we want a serious policy on the Italian seas, I'm sure it would be possible to do that, to provide new resources to Libya, but we don't even know who's monitoring what's being done, and nobody knows, particularly with people involved in terrorism. Who knows?
Thank you, Mr. Borghezio. Next speaker, Mr. SYNADINOS, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. The Central Mediterranean route, working with the Italian authorities, what we're seeing is an uncontrolled flow of migrants, of refugees. And we need to have talks between between Italy and Libya. Greece, because of its islands and because of its location, is also concerned about the need to do something there, given the fact that there is government instability there, and we will be among the first to suffer. There is a real entry point there in Italy, and the hotspots are increasing in number, particularly in a country where we're seeing high youth unemployment. It's proved very difficult to get traction on these flows of migrants. And Turkey is one of the main culprits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Synadinos. And now for 2 minutes, Ms. Metsola.
Thank you, President. At this point in history, it is difficult to have a debate on migration without taking the opportunity to reaffirm that the bottom line is that Europe remains committed to acting as a safe haven for those fleeing war and persecution and who are eligible for protection. Despite our long debates on how we should go about it, that must remain our core principle forged through the very worst of times. That must be the starting point for our discussions, and we must be the example to the world on this issue. The situation in Libya remains precarious, and the EU must stand ready to help without imposition. But while the Libyan people must remain masters of their own destiny, the EU does have a crucial role in helping with aid and expertise in helping Libya to build up its border management, its asylum systems, improve its law enforcement capabilities and help in its fight against terrorism. We are already doing a lot as a union, but we must stand ready to do more. It is only with a functioning Libyan state that we will ever have a proper chance to agree together on enhanced cooperation to sustainability and safely manage migration flows, while defeating terror, destroy trafficking networks' business models and ultimately save lives. That said, we must be careful to avoid giving the impression that a magic bullet addressing migration flows from Libya can suddenly appear from one day to the next. It is a lengthy process, and there are many steps yet to be taken before there are proper functioning state apparatus there. And we have to acknowledge this, or risk alienating our citizens on this issue and playing into populists' hands. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you, Ms. Metsola. And now for a minute and a half, Mr. Fleckenstein.
Dear colleagues, President, through the Mediterranean route to 2016, as well, an unprecedented number of people have come to Europe. More than 4,500 people drowned, and the Commission, of course, deserves our support in all measures, any measure that can save lives, and particularly not playing into the hand of the traffickers and improving the situation in the refugee camps. But what kind of twisted attitude is that from Mr. Borghezio to criticize the fact that we save refugees from drowning as if they were doing it because it's fun to run away? What kind of attitude is that? There are unanswered questions. What of the cooperation with the Libyan authorities after the disaster that we've wreaked there? For example, with the Coast Guard, which in no way is something that the government has control over. But one thing that is utterly unacceptable is that in these camps nothing is said about the illegal flow of immigration and the fight against the root causes for people leaving, or what's going to happen to Dublin and the successor, and our obligations in the member states when it comes to paying into the funds. You can be assured these efforts will be only successful if we do what we've actually set out to do.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Fleckenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein. The next speaker, Ms. Schaake.
Thank you, President. High Representative. You've spoken about the European way today when we critically debated President Trump's executive order. And while I cannot agree more that the EU must step up to the plate as a global player that is values-based, we are hardly in a position to preach on migration or on the treatment of refugees. The deal, or so-called statement with Turkey, set the tone for cynical outsourcing of EU responsibilities. Doctors Without Borders refuses European funds as a result. And look at the failure of European member state governments to secure our common borders and to provide proper shelter for those fleeing war. They still do not have a common position on the war in Syria, and the numbers of people coming to our shores and dying on sea are still very, very high. But instead of learning from past mistakes, this Turkey arrangement now risks becoming a blueprint for more deals, including with Libya. So I would like to know how refugee and migrant rights will be respected with a situation of camps that are labelled as concentration camp situations and torture taking place. How does managing borders square with the right to asylum, and how do we make sure that EU...
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Schaake.
Thank you, Ms. Schaake. Now for 1 minute, Ms. ALBIOL GUZMÁN. As a response to the inhuman measures that we've heard announced by Mr. Trump, Mr. Weber, leader of the European People's Party, came out to clarify that we're not about building walls, we build bridges. I imagine these bridges are the bridge to Turkey, the bridge to Afghanistan, Sudan, Pakistan or Nigeria. Bridges to deport people who are denied international protection here in European shores. Or possibly the bridge he was talking about was that agreement that's going to be signed with Libya, so that Libyan coast guards intercept migrants and refugees in the seas and take them back to Libya. There's a report from 2 months ago from the UN that documents malnutrition, forced labor, sexual abuse, torture and beatings in immigrant centers in Libya. Some say that they are like concentration camps. That's where these solidarity bridges of the European Union lead to. They lead to these centers. Thank you, Ms. ALBIOL GUZMÁN. And now for 1 minute, Ms. LOCHBIHLER.
Amnesty International berichtete von schlimmsten Grausamkeiten gegenüber.
Amnesty International talked about the most terrible cruelty against people held in Libya, and I would remind you of what the German embassy said in Niger. They talked about systematic abuse of human rights. I quote, the situations are like in concentration camps, according to mobile phone pictures. Such reports suggest that there can be no return of migrants to Libya. By assisting the Coast Guard in Libya and providing with additional equipment, it's clear that the member states are seeking to bypass any ban on so-called refoulement. It makes no difference whether we ourselves send people back to the chaos that is Libya, or whether the Libyan Coast Guard do so. Those that send people to a situation where they might be subject to torture are responsible for the most serious human rights breaches, and I find it most alarming that the presidency has rethought its interpretation of what refoulement is. Thank you very much, Ms. LOCHBIHLER. Next speaker, Ms. Meijer.
Managing migration and saving lives, dat is de titel van dit debat. En het zijn beide wel de laatste zaken die de Europese Unie het afgelopen jaar gedaan heeft. Want de EU managt geen migratie, maar faciliteert het. En Brussel redt geen levens, maar veroorzaakt meer slachtoffers. Want dankzij uw open grenzenbeleid blijven de
But thanks to this policy, we're seeing migration continue, and we're seeing a policy which is in place which simply costs money and doesn't bring the results. The fact is that there are terrorists among the refugees, and yet you still continue to allow that influx to take place at the risk of our security. We have got to close our frontiers. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meijer. Now for 1.5 minutes, Ms. Mussolini.
Thank you, President. Saving human lives at sea is a priority, as not to allow lives to be exploited once they have been saved. But unfortunately, this is exactly what's happening in some places. The High Commissioner focused on what I think is a central point. What we have been up against, this agreement with Turkey and the Balkan route and the eastern flank of the Mediterranean. But in the same way, we need to look towards our partners with the neighboring countries on the EU's borders, the third countries, and we need to tackle the immigration problem. In the Parliament, we've been considering the 7 directives on the common asylum system in Europe. It's of crucial importance. Aside from Libya, we also need to get to the list of safe havens, not the national list, but the European list. That's of crucial importance as part of this package to resolve the problem.
Thank you. Mulțumim. Doamna Schlein, 1 minut 30 de secunde.
Grazie Presidente. Siamo molto preoccupati.
President, we are very concerned by the Maltese presidency seeking to replicate the Turkey agreement with Libya. Even if there are differences, for example, training the Libyan Coast Guard to reject people. Libya is an unstable country, has not signed the Geneva Convention, and we cannot regard it as being a safe country by any standards of imagination. The UN is talking about torture, rape, all manner of violence, and the German ambassador, a letter emerged today comparing the camps to the Lager, the concentration camps. How much proof do we need? The executive orders from Trump and the big protest, I think we've got to give a different signal. A few months ago, 3 weeks ago in New York, an agreement was signed calling for greater burden sharing with migrants and refugees. 83% of refugees are in developing countries worldwide, and we have got to play our part here. And yet the Commission Council both seem to want to outsource our responsibility, agrees with Turkey Migration Compact and a revision of Dublin, which may well create a filter halting immigration. We need a major resettlement plan so they can be plucked from the hardships they face on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Doamna Atkinson, 1 minut.
He really excelled herself today with 18 minutes of complete hot air as usual. Let's go back to who created these problems in Libya. It was Blair, Sarkozy, Cameron, Obama, all gone and cheered on by this place. But we're expected to clean up their mess. But I have an answer. We should consider building a wall of nation-state naval frigates to block this invasion. And then we deploy special forces, again, nation-state special forces, to destroy the people traffickers and destroy their vessels. Let's get tough, because our human rights and our safety as European citizens is under threat. Let's take a leaf out of President Trump's policies. Let's protect our borders, our way of life, our culture, and our liberties, because I tell you it's under threat. And I, for one, are actually in total support of what Mr Trump is doing as the only female UK politician that stood by him. You've got such a rocket coming to you. You think Brexit was bad? Well, Trump is with a nuclear warhead.
Thank you very much.
Shame on you, madam.
Mr. Lenaers. Mr. Lenaers, 1 minute 30 seconds.
Ja, dank u voor.
Yes, thank you, President. More than 13,000 people over the past years have died on the Mediterranean Sea. Our number one priority must be to prevent more people losing their lives by drowning, and the only way, I think, to avoid that from happening is to ensure that the people don't get into these terrible boats. And I think in the Mediterranean, the countries in the region need to know how to protect their borders, to tackle the criminal smugglers, and to protect the refugees. And of course, the Commission's plans address these points, but of course, this is something that we've been calling for years, and if we look back over the past few years, we can only note that the results are not really present. The European Council on the 1st of July said before the end of 2016 that we would have more results and would have migration pacts. Except in the case of Niger, unfortunately, I don't see anything of that happening, and I wonder in the long run whether we can consider making further progress. The second point on the Libyan Coast Guard. In the long run, is it realistic to expect the Libyan Coast Guard to actually be up to the task that you expect? And why, throughout the Commission in the communication proposal, is nothing said about the full implementation of Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the EU NAVFOR mission? Thank you.
Mulțumim. Doamna Dalli, 1 minut 30 de secunde.
Thank you, Mrs. Dalli. 1 minute and a half.
Grazie, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Despite the fact that the EU has been talking about the situation for years, about lives being lost during the crossing, hundreds of thousands of people are still waiting in Libya to board these boats, and human traffickers who become wealthy off the backs of these people. Different sources are talking about millions of people in Libya waiting to cross over to Europe. The situation is critical, and once we have better weather, we will also have large influxes of numbers, and we don't have any solutions. Effective solutions can be reached if we focus on the human traffickers, and the people who are requesting asylum will not have to board these boats, and we will be able to help them. We need schemes that give an opportunity of safe passage for immigrants and refugees who have a right to asylum in a controlled and effective manner, where we can give them international protection in a fair and equitable manner. International obligations that have always guided us should be protected. However, we need to be proactive. We need to focus more on the Mediterranean. We need to discuss and negotiate with the north of Africa, and perhaps then we will see the first signs of stability in such a difficult region. Thank you.
López Aguilar, 1 minute.
1 minute, López Aguilar.
Mike.
Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, once upon a time, an awful deal with Turkey, which was never deemed to be an international agreement, was much protested against here in the European Parliament. Not only was it inhuman to outsource the so-called migratory crisis in the Mediterranean, but because it wasn't an official response. All it did was just send the pressure to the hell that is Libya. It's a route of the damned where so many people lose their lives. So it's very sad indeed that we identify more with the discourse of the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We identify with that far more than with what the European authorities are doing. Council is meeting in Malta, so please can I appeal to the Council? An all-embracing response is required that is in line with European values, and that means legal ways of entering the European Union, so that refugees can obtain refugee protection. Humanitarian visas, they're essential. They're essential if we are once again to provide a humanitarian response to us. The speaker is interrupted.
Grazie. È un dato di fatto. In assenza di...
President, it's certainly clear that migratory flows through the Mediterranean in the next few months are going to increase. And we are facing a structural phenomenon which requires concerted action and targeted policies, and not ad hoc responses. Saving human lives remains the priority for the Commission as well. We need to sit down and assess the tools we have available to us. When it comes to search and rescue, let's not think that we can stop the migration flows from Libya or in the territorial waters and think we can then take people back to detention centres, which are real, literally lagers in concentration camps where human rights are under threat. Migration policy can only be measured. We cannot think of it simply in terms of admission and repatriation. We must take a holistic view, we adopted a resolution on that subject only a year ago. Thank you.
Ana Gomes, 1 minute.
Thousands of deaths in 2016, tens of thousands of refugees in the most terrible conditions in Greece and Bulgaria. This points to a tragedy the European Union has proved unable to deal with. We've not managed to flow to Mediterranean. We don't have an efficient asylum system, and we are continuing to basically help out trafficking criminals by not opening up legal ways into the European Union through humanitarian visas. The Malta summit will be a disgrace and a failure if you continue outsourcing our responsibility for our borders. We have to continue helping the OIM and UNHCR so they can help migrants and Libyans. Yes, Libyans, Ms. Mogherini. We can't have readmission agreements with Turkey, similar to Turkey with Libya. That would be counterproductive. It's essential for our governments to agree to revamp European solidarity. There are people outside Trump and Putin want to destroy Europe, and they want to destroy democracy. So let's put an end to nationalists and xenophobes who want to prevent us from delivering on the basic duties on refugees and migrants. Thank you.
Procedura catch the eye și vă anunț că avem înscriși pe listă 5.
Now we move to the catch the eye procedure. We have 5 colleagues on the list. We'll be giving everybody the floor. Mrs. GIUFFRIDA to start with.
Presidente, nel 2016 sono
Chairman, in 2016, more than 180,000 individuals tried to reach the European shores through the Mediterranean route, and we know fully well that unfortunately many of them didn't manage to make it to the coast. And the Commission has announced a cooperation with Libya, the most problematic neighbour of ours, to manage the Libyan coast might be a first step, but in no way does that constitute a solution for the entire Mediterranean, particularly for those territories that can no longer manage and they're left to fend for themselves with the hundreds of thousands of people coming from everywhere in Africa, the Middle Eastern, to the Sicilian and Greek coasts, held up where we get these true camps. Of course, we have an approach and an immigration plan within the solidarity and relocation isn't working as it should. The figures on resettlement are too low still, truly unacceptable. So we certainly hope that the summit the day after tomorrow will adopt a different approach.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Mimica, the European Union must turn its views and it's their thoughts to the Aegean. In the Aegean, where there is a threat that is going to again be full of refugees, in particular illegal migrants, the islands of the Aegean, where many thousands of people are waiting basically in holding pens from the past. These are islands which have really got to the situation where it's completely untenable. Samos is one case where it's explosive. The same is true for Lesbos or Mytilene, which I visited in January. They say they cannot take any more illegal immigrants because most of them concentrated there are illegal immigrants, and they cannot accept more hotspots. The time has come for measures to be taken because there are 168,000 resettlements which are waiting. Thank you very much.
Domnul Urtasun.
Mr. Urtasun.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The Ombudsman just criticized you because the agreement, or rather non-agreement with Turkey, had no impact study on human rights, and it was also critical because you deemed Turkey to be a safe country. You haven't addressed these issues broached by the Ombudsman, and yet you want a similar agreement with Libya, in this case to help the Libyan Coast Guard to send back refugees that are trying to reach Europe. Now let me remind you, Libya is a country that hasn't ratified the 1951 Convention on Refugees. An ambassador in Niger said that there are camps there that are comparable to concentration camps. Now that can't continue, and no agreement can be possible. Now we are talking about managing the Central Mediterranean route, that there are still deaths on the Mediterranean because we don't have a mission to provide assistance, and it's NGOs that are doing the job of governments on this front. Thank you.
Domnul Epitideos.
Mr. Epitideos.
Mr. Epitideos. Thank you very much, Mr. President. The European Union has failed dismally to get control of flows of migrants from Turkey to Greece. And now it seems that they are trying again to stop the flow of illegal migrants from Libya to Italy across the central Mediterranean. Now, the fact of the matter is that for no good reason, without results, huge amounts of money are being spent and being wasted, squandered, which could be used to reduce the problems which European citizens and European countries are currently facing. Countries which have received large numbers of illegal immigrants, and they're the ones who, there's those countries in the south which should be getting help and assistance. Mrs. Mogherini talked about the need for solidarity, yes, but we've got to begin by showing solidarity to Greece, because they've been suffering from the austerity programme, the adjustment programme for years now. They're the ones who need solidarity, and yet we're giving free assistance to all our neighbours. Solidarity begins at home, thank you, in Greece.
1 minute, Mr. Caputo. President, the Mediterranean represents a migration coming to the Schengen borders, the external borders of the European Union, and Europe is moving too slowly. Of course, we're seeing the migratory flow in Europe forcing us to deal with age-old problems urgently, in a very real way. There are too many migrants that embark on the Mediterranean route, and we need to stabilize the countries from which the boats leave, and to put a definitive stop to the trafficking in human beings. Most of these individuals are forced to flee their own countries because of conflict, persecution, violation of human rights, and situations of poverty. It is crucial to improve the exchange of best practices between member states, and the European Union needs to build a true common policy with partnership countries, particularly those that border the Mediterranean, to do an adequate job to deal with the situation. Thank you. I'd now like to give the floor to Commissioner Mimica.
Thank you, President, honourable members. On behalf of High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Madam Mogherini, I would like to convey her regret and apologies for not attending this parliamentary debate in full due to the conflicting agenda points that led her to the continuation of the talks between Serbia and Kosovo this evening in Brussels. Mr. President, this has been indeed a very interesting debate. As we have seen on previous occasions, the honourable members hold somewhat divergent views when it comes to the issue of migration. However, I also take note that the large majority of the honourable members support our approach to migration management, complementing our long-term efforts, such as the partnership framework, with short-term measures as outlined in our recent communication on the Central Mediterranean. I am very grateful for this support. Even though some may like to present it in that way, there is no quick fix to the current situation. Only by applying a comprehensive and tailor-made approach, not replicating any other arrangements, continuing to save lives at sea, cracking down on smugglers and traffickers, addressing the root causes of migration, and working more, in particular with our African and international partners, will we be able to more effectively manage migration? This is what we shall be taking from our debate today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Cu aceasta dezbaterea este închisă.
This brings us to the end of the debate. We can now move on to the following item on our agenda, the situation in South Sudan. I'll give the floor to the Commissioner.
Thank you, President. Honourable members,